Tonight, there is no rush to understand everything. There is no need to decide what is true or false, real or imagined. Instead, this is an invitation to slow down, to let your breathing settle, and to gently enter a subject that has lived quietly at the edges of human experience for far longer than most people realize. Alien abductions, often described as close encounters of the fourth kind, are usually presented through sharp headlines, dramatic reenactments, or sensational debates. But when the noise fades, what remains are human stories, calmly told, carefully remembered, and often carried in silence for years. The idea of a close encounter did not begin as entertainment. It was originally a classification system, an attempt by researchers to bring order to reports that were already circulating. A close encounter of the fourth kind refers specifically to cases in which a person claims to have been taken, physically or otherwise, by non-human entities. Not merely seeing something in the sky, not simply observing a strange craft from a distance, but being involved directly, intimately, in an experience that altered the course of their life. What makes these stories unusual is not only what is described, but how consistently they are told. Across decades, across continents, across people who have never met and often never spoken publicly, similar details emerge. The setting is usually ordinary. A quiet road, a bedroom in the early hours of the morning, a familiar place transformed, briefly, into something unrecognizable. Many experiencers describe a sense of stillness before it begins, as though the world itself pauses. Time behaves differently. Memory becomes fragmented. And, afterward, life never feels quite the same. For those listening tonight, this is not a story meant to provoke fear. It is not designed to shock or persuade. Instead, it is meant to hold space for uncertainty, to acknowledge that something has been reported, repeatedly, earnestly, and often at great personal cost, even when no explanation fully satisfies. Governments have denied it. Scientists have questioned it. Psychologists have tried to map it. And yet, the reports continue. Most people who come forward with abduction experiences do not do so eagerly. Many wait years, sometimes decades. Some only speak after retirement. Others only after a health crisis or the loss of a loved one. When researchers began systematically interviewing abductees in the late 20th century, they noticed a striking pattern. These individuals were not seeking fame. In fact, many actively avoided attention. They feared ridicule, damage to their careers, or being dismissed as unstable. Some had never even labeled their experiences as alien abduction, until a therapist, doctor, or investigator suggested the term. Official records reflect this discomfort. Early police reports describe witnesses who were confused, distressed, but coherent. Medical professionals noted anxiety and sleep disturbances, but not psychosis. In several cases, physicians documented unexplained marks or symptoms without offering conclusions. The language used in these reports is cautious, restrained, almost reluctant. The subject appears sincere. No evidence of fabrication. Cause unknown. This tension between sincerity and uncertainty defines the world of the fourth kind. It exists in the space between belief and disbelief, where answers are incomplete and conclusions remain provisional. Researchers who studied these cases often emphasize this point. They did not claim certainty. Instead, they asked why so many people, separated by geography and culture, reported experiences with such structural similarity. Why certain motifs repeated. Why these experiences often began in childhood and resurfaced later in life. And why they were so frequently accompanied by intense emotional responses, including fear, awe, and a profound sense of being observed. As you settle deeper into this story, it is worth noting that abduction narratives did not emerge in isolation. They appeared alongside major shifts in human history. The dawn of the nuclear age, the rapid expansion of aviation and space exploration, a growing awareness of the vastness of the universe. For the first time, humanity could imagine visitors not as angels or demons, but as beings from elsewhere, beings governed not by myth, but by physics. Yet even as language changed, the experience itself remained strangely familiar. Scholars have noted parallels between modern abduction accounts and much older stories. Tales of night visitors, missing time, journeys to other realms, and beings who performed examinations or imparted warnings. In earlier centuries, these experiences were framed through religion or folklore. In the modern era, they were reframed through technology and science. The question that quietly lingers is whether the phenomenon itself changed, or only our interpretation of it. This series of stories will not ask you to choose an answer. Instead, it will walk slowly through what has been recorded, through testimony given under hypnosis and without it, through government memoranda that admit curiosity but deny conclusions, through the voices of researchers who tried carefully to remain objective, and through the memories of those who still struggle to explain what happened to them on certain nights they will never forget. As a listener preparing for sleep, you may notice that these stories unfold gently. There are no sudden turns here, no loud declarations. Just a gradual layering of detail, like snowfall settling on the ground. The mystery does not demand resolution. It simply asks to be observed. In the quiet hours, when the mind is less guarded, these stories have a way of resonating more deeply. Perhaps because they speak to something fundamental, the feeling of not being alone, of being watched by a universe far larger than we can comprehend. Or perhaps because they mirror the vulnerability of sleep itself, that nightly surrender of control, when consciousness drifts and the boundary between waking and dreaming becomes thin. Many abductees report that their experiences occurred during moments like these. Late at night, early morning, times when the body is still and the mind is relaxed. Researchers have debated whether this timing points toward neurological explanations or something else entirely. The debate remains unresolved, but the pattern persists. And so, as this journey begins, there is nothing you need to decide, only something to listen to. A collection of real accounts, grounded in documentation, shaped by human memory, and carried forward through time. Whether these encounters represent visitors from elsewhere, misunderstood psychological states, or something not yet defined, they remain one of the most enduring and quietly unsettling mysteries of the modern age. For now, allow the questions to rest. Let the details unfold slowly. The night is calm. The world is quiet. And somewhere between certainty and doubt, the stories of the fourth kind are waiting to be told. Long before the word alien entered the human vocabulary, people were already telling stories of being taken, not in spacecraft, and not by beings described in scientific terms, but by entities that existed just beyond ordinary understanding. These early accounts were preserved in folklore, religious texts, and oral traditions, often framed as encounters with gods, spirits, angels, or beings from hidden realms. When viewed through a modern lens, many of these stories carry striking similarities to what are now called abduction experiences. The language is different, but the structure of the experience feels familiar. In medieval Europe, there were countless tales of people taken by fairies in the night. Farmers claimed they were lured from their beds, led into glowing hills, and returned hours or days later with no memory of what had happened inside. Some awoke to find time had passed differently than expected. Others described being examined, warned, or shown visions of distant places. Historians note that these stories were not considered fantasy at the time. They were treated as serious events, sometimes even recorded in church documents as spiritual trials or moral lessons. Across the world, similar narratives appear. In parts of Ireland and Scotland, the concept of fairy abduction was so deeply embedded in culture that certain locations were avoided at night. In Japan, folklore spoke of luminous beings who descended from the sky to carry humans away. Indigenous cultures in the Americas described sky people who interacted with chosen individuals, often during altered states of consciousness. In Siberian shamanic traditions, initiates spoke of being taken by non-human entities, disassembled, and returned with new knowledge or abilities. These stories were not metaphorical to the people who told them. They were lived experiences, integrated into spiritual and cultural frameworks. What connects these accounts is not a shared explanation, but a shared pattern. The individual is taken against their will or without full understanding. The environment changes suddenly. Time behaves strangely. The experience leaves a lasting psychological or emotional mark. Modern researchers who study abduction reports have noted that these elements appear consistently, regardless of era or belief system. This raises an uncomfortable question. Are these experiences shaped entirely by culture, or is culture shaping how people explain something more fundamental? The shift toward extraterrestrial interpretations did not occur until the mid-20th century. Before that, the idea of life beyond Earth existed mostly in philosophical or speculative terms. It was not part of everyday imagination. That began to change after World War II, as technology advanced rapidly and humanity's relationship with the sky transformed. Airplanes became common. Rockets were tested. Satellites were imagined. The heavens were no longer purely divine. They became reachable. The late 1940s marked a turning point. Reports of unidentified flying objects began appearing in newspapers. Military pilots described sightings they could not explain. The term flying saucer entered public consciousness. At the same time, the Cold War created an atmosphere of secrecy, fear, and technological competition. The sky became a place of both possibility and threat. In this environment, older patterns of strange encounters were reinterpreted through a new framework. By the 1950s, the first modern abduction reports began to surface. These early cases were not initially described as extraterrestrial in nature. Many witnesses simply reported missing time, strange lights, or encounters with beings they could not identify. Only later, often after hypnosis or repeated recall, did the full narrative emerge. Researchers have noted that this gradual unfolding mirrors the way traumatic memories are often processed by the human mind. Psychologists studying these cases emphasize that memory is not a recording device. It is fluid, influenced by emotion, expectation, and cultural context. However, they also point out that memory distortion alone does not fully account for the level of detail, consistency, and emotional intensity present in many abduction narratives, especially when individuals report physical symptoms, behavioral changes, or recurring dreams that predate any exposure to UFO media. One of the most debated aspects of abduction origins is the role of sleep. Many experiences occur at night, during periods of partial consciousness. Sleep paralysis, a condition in which the body is temporarily immobilized while the mind is awake, can produce vivid hallucinations. People may feel watched, touched, or unable to move. Some scientists argue that this explains the core of the abduction phenomenon. Yet even proponents of this theory admit that it does not fully explain why people across cultures report remarkably similar beings, procedures, and sequences of events. Historians add another layer to this discussion. They note that extraordinary experiences tend to emerge more visibly during periods of social stress. Plagues, wars, religious upheaval, and technological revolutions often coincide with increases in visionary or anomalous reports. The mid-20th century fits this pattern precisely. Humanity stood on the brink of nuclear annihilation while simultaneously reaching for the stars. It was an era defined by both fear and curiosity. Official institutions struggled to respond. Early government investigations focused on the physical reality of unidentified objects, not on personal experiences. Abduction reports were often dismissed as hoaxes, misidentifications, or psychological disturbances. Yet internal documents reveal a quieter concern. Analysts noted that witnesses often appeared mentally stable and genuinely distressed. There was uncertainty about how to categorize such cases. They did not fit neatly into existing scientific or military frameworks. As decades passed, abduction reports did not fade. Instead, they evolved. The beings described became more standardized. The settings, more clinical. The narratives, more complex. Critics argue that this evolution reflects the influence of media and popular culture. Supporters counter that media simply provided language for experiences that were already occurring. The debate remains unresolved. What is clear is that the phenomenon did not arise suddenly or in isolation. It has roots that stretch deep into human history, woven through myth, belief, and personal testimony. Whether interpreted as encounters with gods, spirits, fairies, or extraterrestrials, the experience of being taken has followed humanity across centuries. As this story continues, the focus will narrow from ancient patterns to specific individuals and documented cases. The shift from myth to testimony will become clearer. And the question that lingers, whether these experiences reflect something external or something within, will remain quietly open. For now, allow the long view to settle in. These stories did not begin in our lifetime, and they may not end with it. They are part of a much older conversation between humanity and the unknown, one that continues softly in the background of history. By the mid-20th century, the quiet stories of being taken, whispered across centuries and continents, began to take on a form recognizable to the modern world. These were no longer tales of fairies or spirits, but accounts situated firmly in the context of the rapidly changing post-war era. Aviation had made the skies familiar, yet still mysterious. Atomic energy had introduced a new awareness of unseen forces, and the emerging space race stirred imaginations with the possibility that life might exist beyond our planet. Against this backdrop, the first modern abduction reports began to crystallize, creating the framework for what researchers would later categorize as close encounters of the fourth kind. One of the earliest widely noted cases occurred in the late 1950s, although many accounts surfaced quietly before being documented. Witnesses described sudden disappearances, unusual lights, and encounters with beings that defied conventional description. Unlike the folklore of previous centuries, these stories began to intersect with institutions. Police officers, medical professionals, and even psychologists were occasionally called upon to document incidents. What made these cases particularly notable was the consistency of certain details. Beings described as humanoid but not human, examinations conducted in bright or clinical settings, and the pervasive experience of missing time. The repetition of these motifs across unrelated cases drew the attention of early researchers, who began to wonder if they were observing a new type of phenomenon. The case of Barney and Betty Hill, first publicly reported in 1961, but occurring in 1961 New Hampshire, became a touchstone for modern abduction studies. They were an ordinary couple on a routine drive when their experience began. Both reported seeing a strange craft in the night sky, followed by episodes of memory loss. Later, under hypnosis, they recalled being taken aboard a craft and subjected to examinations. The transcript of their sessions reveals meticulous detail, measurements, interactions with beings, and sensory impressions that were at once mundane and surreal. Researchers emphasized that the Hills were articulate, credible, and cooperative throughout the investigation, while skeptics pointed to possible misinterpretation or influence from media. The case was unusual for its time because it combined consistent personal testimony with corroborating details, such as the timing of star charts Betty later drew and physical observations during their drive. Other cases followed in the 1960s, each contributing to the developing narrative of modern abductions. In Pascagoula, Mississippi, for example, 2 men reported being taken from a riverbank by beings with mechanical, almost robotic features. They described a sensation of paralysis, an inability to call out, and a series of examinations before being returned. Local authorities initially approached the case cautiously, concerned about public reaction. Medical examinations of one witness revealed physiological responses consistent with extreme stress, including elevated heart rate and tremors, but no injuries that fully explained the experience. Such patterns began to solidify a template. Abductions often occurred during ordinary circumstances, involved direct contact with non-human entities, and produced profound psychological and physiological effects. Early investigators recognized that these reports were often dismissed by mainstream society. The cultural context of the 1950s and 1960s valued rationality, scientific explanation, and social conformity. Claims of being taken by aliens were often ridiculed in newspapers or treated as entertainment in late-night radio shows. Yet within professional circles, some researchers acknowledged that there was a credible puzzle. Law enforcement reports described witnesses who were coherent, emotionally affected, and insistent on the reality of their experiences. Psychologists studying trauma noted that while memory can be unreliable, the stress, anxiety, and long-term behavioral changes reported by abductees were genuine and measurable. This gap between public dismissal and private acknowledgement would become a recurring theme in the study of abductions. Hypnosis, in particular, emerged as a key tool for documenting early cases. Many abduction witnesses reported fragmented or missing memories immediately following the experience. Hypnotherapists attempted to guide subjects into recollection, carefully recording details of the alleged encounters. While the practice has been controversial, critics argue that it can introduce false memories. It also revealed patterns. Witnesses consistently described similar examination procedures, methods of communication, and even recurring imagery. Researchers noted that these consistencies could not easily be explained by chance alone, media influence, or cultural contagion, especially in cases that predated widespread UFO literature. Another defining characteristic of early modern abductions was the profound emotional impact on witnesses. People often reported anxiety, recurring dreams, sleep disturbances, and a deep sense of being watched. Some experienced sudden phobias, an interest in astronomy, or obsessive curiosity about the cosmos. Psychologists suggested that these changes reflected the mind attempting to process an experience that could not be integrated into ordinary reality. At the same time, some historians argued that such reports served as mirrors for societal fears, the unknown, the alien, the uncontrollable technological future, and that these narratives offered a culturally coherent way to express those anxieties. Researchers in this era also began to examine physical evidence, though it was limited. Some witnesses displayed temporary marks, scars, or abrasions that did not have clear explanations. Others reported missing objects or subtle environmental anomalies associated with their experiences. Although these findings were neither universal nor conclusive, they added a dimension to abduction studies that extended beyond memory or psychology. The phenomenon began to straddle the line between subjective experience and observable, measurable evidence, a delicate balance that would shape investigations for decades to come. By the end of the 1960s, it became clear that these early cases were not isolated incidents. Patterns were emerging. Ordinary people taken in ordinary settings, recurring motifs of examination, time displacement, and the appearance of non-human entities. Government and scientific institutions began to pay quiet attention, even while publicly downplaying the significance. The groundwork was laid for the next decades, when abduction reports would grow in number, sophistication, and international scope. These first modern cases are important not only for their content, but also for what they reveal about human perception, memory, and belief. They demonstrate that extraordinary experiences can occur within the framework of everyday life, that they can leave measurable psychological traces, and that they persist across decades despite skepticism, ridicule, or dismissal. The Hills, Pascagoula, and other early witnesses remind us that the world is experienced subjectively, and that reality can sometimes extend beyond what is commonly accepted as possible. As the story continues, the focus will shift from these foundational cases to the inner workings of the experiences themselves, the psychology, the physiological responses, and the detailed narratives of abduction. The aim will be to explore not only what was reported, but also how these experiences were perceived, remembered, and recorded, inviting listeners to understand the phenomenon from a calm, reflective perspective, gently moving them closer to the human heart of the mystery. As we move deeper into these stories, it becomes essential to pause and consider the internal world of those who have reported abductions. It is one thing to recount an event, to describe lights in the sky or strange beings, but quite another to experience it directly. The testimonies of abductees are not simply collections of visual impressions. They are immersive, often profoundly altering experiences that engage the mind, body, and emotions simultaneously. Researchers studying these accounts have noted patterns that suggest a complex interplay between physiology, consciousness, and perception, while still leaving room for questions that science cannot fully answer. Many abductees describe the onset of an experience as subtle and disorienting. It often begins in familiar surroundings, a bedroom, a quiet street, or a remote natural setting. A soft hum, a sudden flash of light, or an inexplicable presence marks the transition from ordinary reality into the extraordinary. Witnesses frequently report an acute awareness of their own vulnerability, sometimes accompanied by a paralysis that prevents movement. This phenomenon closely resembles what medical professionals recognize as sleep paralysis, a state in which the mind is awake while the body remains immobile. During these episodes, vivid hallucinations can occur, often involving a sensed presence, pressure on the chest, or figures appearing in the periphery. Yet even within this framework, many abductees recall elements that transcend ordinary explanations: tactile sensations, prolonged missing time, and detailed interactions with non-human entities. The psychological dimension of abduction accounts is equally compelling. Researchers have observed that individuals often display intense emotional reactions, both during and after the experience. Fear, awe, confusion, and a sense of being studied or observed are common. Some describe a profound feeling of significance, as if they have been singled out for a purpose beyond comprehension. Psychologists note that such experiences can trigger long-term changes in personality and behavior. Heightened curiosity about the universe, sudden interest in science or spirituality, and alterations in sleep patterns or cognitive focus. This combination of physiological and psychological effects distinguishes abduction reports from ordinary dreams or hallucinations, suggesting a multi-layered experience that engages the nervous system, memory, and consciousness simultaneously. Memory, of course, plays a critical role in shaping these accounts. Many abductees report fragmented recollections, with large gaps of time they cannot account for. Hypnosis and guided regression have been used to help recover these memories, though the technique is not without controversy. Critics argue that suggestion or leading questions can introduce false details, yet repeated patterns across independent cases, sometimes separated by decades and continents, suggest that there is more than mere fabrication or social influence at play. Some witnesses recall medical-like examinations, implant procedures, or communication with beings in ways that defy conventional understanding, yet remain consistent within the narrative framework. Researchers often emphasize that whether these memories reflect objective reality or complex mental phenomena, the experiences are subjectively real and carry measurable emotional weight. Physiological effects also accompany abduction experiences. Studies have documented elevated heart rate, sweating, trembling, and other autonomic responses consistent with extreme stress or fear. In some cases, individuals report marks or minor injuries with no conventional explanation, or sensations of anesthesia and numbness in specific areas of the body. Sleep studies suggest that certain neurological events, such as REM intrusion into waking consciousness, could explain some sensations, but they do not fully account for the detailed, coherent narratives that often accompany these physical responses. The intersection of body and mind in these experiences is therefore an area of particular interest to both psychologists and medical researchers. Another fascinating aspect is the recurring motifs within the experiences themselves. Across decades and cultures, abductees often describe similar beings, humanoid in shape but markedly different in features, with large eyes, slender frames, and a quiet, deliberate presence. The beings are frequently described as communicating telepathically, guiding the experiencer through unfamiliar spaces, and performing examinations that, while clinical in tone, sometimes include inexplicable phenomena. These similarities suggest a pattern structure in the experiences, which researchers debate as either evidence of an external phenomenon or a product of deeply ingrained archetypes and cognitive processes. The consistency is particularly striking when cases predate popular UFO culture or media exposure, raising questions about the origins of these images in human consciousness. Time distortion is another critical feature. Abductees often report periods of missing time, sometimes minutes, sometimes hours, in which their ordinary perception of the world is suspended. Studies of consciousness note that our perception of time is highly flexible, influenced by attention, emotion, and environmental cues. Yet abductees consistently describe a sense that external reality continued as normal, while their own experience was stretched or compressed. This disjunction between subjective and objective time remains one of the most puzzling aspects of abduction accounts, and one that cannot be fully explained by conventional psychology alone. The interplay of sleep, memory, and consciousness also suggests a liminal state, a threshold between waking and dreaming, perception and imagination. Researchers have noted that many abductions occur at night, during transitions between sleep stages, or when the individual is fatigued or stressed. In these states, the brain may process experiences differently, blending sensory input, memory fragments, and subconscious imagery into a coherent but unusual narrative. Abductees, however, frequently insist on the reality of the experience, emphasizing that it was far more vivid and consequential than any ordinary dream. The distinction between perception and reality becomes fluid, yet the emotional truth remains undeniable. Cultural and psychological frameworks further shape these experiences. Individuals may use the language and concepts available to them, aliens, beings, spacecraft, or advanced technology, to articulate what they cannot fully comprehend. Yet even when cultural influence is present, the core elements, the sense of being observed, the missing time, the examination or interaction, remain remarkably consistent. This consistency across independent cases strengthens the argument that there is a phenomenon being described, whether it originates externally, internally, or as a combination of both. Ultimately, the psychology and physiology of abduction experiences highlight the profound complexity of human perception. These are experiences that engage every level of awareness, from the body's nervous system to the mind's deepest cognitive processes. They challenge assumptions about reality, memory, and consciousness, and they invite researchers and listeners alike to consider the limits of understanding. For those preparing to drift into sleep tonight, these accounts offer a window into a world that is at once strange, intimate, and hauntingly familiar. They are not tales of terror, but of the mind's encounter with something beyond ordinary experience, something that lingers in the quiet spaces of night, patiently observed, slowly unfolding, and gently calling us to wonder. In the next section, the focus will move outward, from internal experience to external evidence, as we explore 11 detailed cases of close encounters of the fourth kind. These narratives will illustrate the human, physical, and emotional dimensions of abduction, deepening our understanding of what happens when ordinary life intersects with extraordinary phenomena. As we move into the heart of this exploration, it is time to meet the individuals whose experiences shaped the modern understanding of the fourth kind. These are not stories told in haste or with theatrical flourish. They are carefully documented accounts, sometimes corroborated by multiple witnesses, medical examinations, or official observations. Each case is unique, yet patterns begin to emerge. Ordinary people, ordinary lives, and extraordinary events that leave lasting impressions on both memory and being. The story begins with Betty and Barney Hill, whose experience in 1961 remains one of the most studied. Driving home late at night through the forests of New Hampshire, they noticed a peculiar light in the sky, one that moved with an unnatural precision. The encounter escalated as they lost track of time, only to later recall, under hypnosis, being taken aboard a craft. Detailed accounts describe a clinical environment, humanoid beings with large eyes, and what the Hills interpreted as medical examinations. Researchers have pointed out that the Hills were articulate, credible, and had no prior exposure to the popular UFO literature that might have influenced their memories. What makes this case particularly striking is the level of detail, including star charts Betty later drew that matched astronomical reality, suggesting a complex interplay between memory, perception, and perhaps something beyond conventional explanation. Not far in time and place, the Pascagoula abduction of 1973 involved two men fishing along the river when they reported being seized by strange entities. Unlike the Hills, these witnesses were male, blue-collar workers and skeptical of UFO lore before their experience. They described being immobilized by a sudden force, encountering beings with mechanical features, and enduring examinations that felt clinical but alien. Physical reactions were significant. Both men showed signs of extreme stress and trauma. Local authorities initially approached the case cautiously, documenting the claims without sensationalism. The consistency of their accounts, combined with the absence of personal gain or prior exposure to UFO culture, adds credibility to this haunting and enduring narrative. Another illustrative case is the Allagash abduction of 1976, involving 4 men on a camping trip in Maine. During an evening of stargazing, they witnessed a bright object in the sky. Hours later, under hypnosis, they recounted being transported aboard a craft, subjected to examinations, and returned with fragmented memories. What sets this case apart is the multiple witnesses, all of whom reported similar sequences of events independently. Researchers analyzing the Allagash encounter noted the coherence across their accounts and the emotional weight each testimony carried. Dreams and waking life blurred together, creating a narrative that was vivid, unsettling, and yet conveyed with remarkable calmness when recounted years later. The Travis Walton case of 1975 further expanded public awareness of abductions. Walton, a logger in Arizona, reportedly disappeared for 5 days after encountering a glowing craft. His co-workers described seeing the object and witnessing his sudden disappearance, giving the story a rare layer of corroboration. Walton later recounted vivid memories of being aboard the craft, encountering beings with expressive faces, and experiencing an environment that was simultaneously clinical and surreal. Skeptics have argued for hoax or fabrication, yet polygraph tests, ongoing interviews, and the consistency of his narrative over decades have kept this case a focal point for researchers and enthusiasts alike. Other cases, while less famous, are no less compelling. A woman in Maryland in 1968 reported being awakened in her bedroom by luminous figures who guided her into a spacecraft-like environment. Physical sensations of paralysis and numbness were accompanied by vivid observations of technological instruments and alien anatomy. Similarly, a couple in the Pacific Northwest in the early 1970s recalled being abducted while camping, describing small beings performing detailed examinations and communicating telepathically, all while time appeared distorted. These accounts share elements with the more famous cases: missing time, clinical-like interactions, vivid sensory details, and profound psychological effects afterward. One particularly chilling encounter occurred in rural Canada, where a man awoke in the middle of the night to find himself in a brightly lit room with tall, silent figures. Unlike other cases, he reported the presence of other, unseen witnesses observing him, creating a layered sense of scrutiny that left lasting anxiety. Medical tests revealed minor bruising and unexplained marks, although authorities could not confirm the source. Researchers have noted that physical traces, even when minimal, provide an additional dimension to these narratives, distinguishing them from purely hallucinatory experiences. The diversity of witnesses, men, women, couples, individuals from varying social and cultural backgrounds, highlights a critical point. The phenomenon does not discriminate. It crosses class, occupation, geography, and personal belief. Yet despite this diversity, common motifs recur. Beings are often described as humanoid, but distinctly non-human, with large eyes, slender limbs, and an air of observation. Examinations, often described as clinical, recur with remarkable similarity. Missing time and disorientation are almost universal. Even emotional responses, fear, awe, and a profound sense of being studied, appear consistently. In some cases, multiple generations have reported experiences, suggesting either a familial or environmental influence, or perhaps a broader phenomenon affecting human consciousness across time. Some individuals report that dreams and memories of abductions emerged in childhood, only becoming fully clear later in life, often after adult stressors or medical events triggered recollection. The interplay of memory, time, and perception is a recurring theme, reinforcing the complexity of these experiences and the difficulty of understanding them through conventional frameworks alone. What emerges from examining these 11 cases is not a single explanation, but a tapestry of human experience, observation, and narrative. Each story adds a piece to the larger puzzle. Ordinary people encountering extraordinary events, leaving behind memory traces, emotional echoes, and, occasionally, physical markers. Some experiences remain private for decades. Others enter public consciousness, challenging both investigators and the general population to consider the limits of reality and the vast unknown that surrounds us. As we continue, it is worth noting that these encounters are not intended to frighten, but to illuminate. They demonstrate the profound intersection of human consciousness with something that defies easy categorization. Through careful listening, reflection, and the slow unfolding of these stories, we gain insight not only into the experiences themselves, but into the human capacity to perceive, process, and endure events that transcend ordinary understanding. In the following sections, attention will shift from the personal to the institutional, from the eyewitnesses themselves to how governments, media, and culture have responded to these cases. This transition will help us understand the broader context in which these mysterious encounters occur and how they have shaped and been shaped by society over time. While individual accounts of abduction captivated the attention of researchers and the public, the response from governments and official institutions was far more measured, cautious, and often hidden from view. These stories, despite their frequency and consistency, rarely received formal acknowledgement in public statements. Yet when internal documents, declassified files, and testimonies of officials are examined, a pattern emerges. Governments did not entirely dismiss these experiences, nor were they willing to confirm them. Instead, a subtle behind-the-scenes curiosity appears, suggesting that even without full understanding, the phenomenon warranted attention. One of the earliest formalized efforts to document unexplained aerial phenomena was Project Blue Book, initiated by the United States Air Force in the 1950s. While the stated purpose of Project Blue Book focused largely on unidentified flying objects rather than direct abductions, records indicate that the investigators collected reports that included personal testimonies of missing time, strange beings, and experiences that mirrored the patterns later associated with the fourth kind. The reports were cataloged with cautionary language: no evidence of fabrication, subject appears sincere, and cause unknown. These statements reveal attention. Officials recognized the credibility of certain witnesses, yet lacked the means, or perhaps the mandate, to provide definitive conclusions. Declassified documents from various governments also hint at a quiet but persistent interest. In the United States, memos occasionally reference unexplained physiological effects reported by individuals, unexplained marks, or anomalous physical phenomena. Similar patterns emerge in France, where the group d'études ETD informations sur les phénomènes aérospatiaux non-identifiés GIPAN quietly investigated UFO phenomena, including witness testimonies of abduction-like experiences. In the former Soviet Union, research into strange aerial sightings included interviews with civilians describing missing time and encounters with unknown beings. While public statements remained skeptical or dismissive, the internal correspondence suggests genuine concern and methodical documentation. Government scientists and military officials often approach these reports with strict scientific protocols, emphasizing objectivity and verification. Polygraphs, physiological tests, and corroborating witness interviews were employed to assess credibility. In several cases, officials noted that witnesses exhibited no signs of mental instability, deception, or fabrication. Instead, they were articulate, consistent, and profoundly affected by their experiences. The challenge for authorities was twofold. First, to determine whether these reports represented a real, measurable phenomenon. Second, to manage the potential social consequences of public acknowledgement, particularly during the Cold War, when fear of aerial threats was already heightened. The tension between secrecy and investigation was compounded by the nature of the phenomena themselves. Abduction experiences are inherently subjective, often leaving few physical traces. Witnesses may describe missing time, subtle marks, or sensations of pressure and paralysis, but rarely can these observations be verified independently. This left investigators in a difficult position. They could neither ignore the sincerity of witnesses nor provide explanations that satisfied conventional scientific or military standards. As a result, much of the official work remained internal, cataloged and archived, awaiting eventual declassification decades later. Some researchers and journalists have suggested that government awareness extended beyond mere documentation into active study. There are accounts of officials consulting with medical experts, psychologists, and aerospace engineers to examine physical evidence reported by abductees. Certain memoranda reference anomalies that were logged, analyzed, and compared with other similar cases. Although no conclusions were ever made public, these internal efforts reveal a methodical approach to understanding the phenomenon, one that acknowledged its complexity without making sensational claims. Internationally, similar dynamics were observed. In France, Gaipan investigators interviewed witnesses who reported abductions, carefully noting the details of missing time, physical sensations, and recurring imagery. Their work emphasized objectivity, often cataloging experiences as unidentified phenomena rather than alien encounters, but the meticulous nature of their documentation lent credibility to the cases. In the United Kingdom, early reports were occasionally logged by the Ministry of Defense, who monitored civilian accounts of strange aerial activity and unexplained personal experiences. Even when these reports were ultimately classified as inconclusive, the effort itself reflected a sustained institutional interest. The pattern that emerges from these governmental actions is subtle but significant. Publicly, officials maintain skepticism, emphasizing rational explanations or dismissing claims as anecdotal. Privately, however, they recognize the persistence, consistency, and emotional intensity of these reports. Across decades, the phenomenon remained on the radar of investigators, scientists, and intelligence officers, even if the conclusions were withheld from the public. Some historians argue that this careful balance between skepticism and attention reflects both a concern for credibility and a recognition of the potential implications of the phenomenon. One of the most intriguing aspects of this governmental awareness is the apparent tension between the subjective and the objective. Abduction experiences are profoundly personal, often leaving witnesses with lingering trauma, anxiety, or curiosity. Governments, conversely, operate in terms of measurable data, physical evidence, and national security priorities. The intersection of these perspectives creates a delicate space, a phenomenon that is simultaneously intensely real for those experiencing it and difficult to quantify in conventional terms. Documents and correspondence suggest that officials understood this, which may explain the quiet, methodical, and sometimes opaque nature of their investigations. Despite the careful documentation and internal concern, governments rarely intervened publicly in individual cases. There was no official acknowledgement of extraterrestrial involvement, no admission of the reality of abductions, and no widespread campaigns to investigate or inform the public. Yet the preservation of these records, later declassified, speaks to a recognition that the phenomenon could not be fully ignored. It existed in a liminal space, a mystery at the edges of human perception, acknowledged with curiosity, recorded with diligence, but ultimately unresolved. For the listener, this period of governmental attention offers an important context. It reminds us that these accounts were not solely the product of imagination or media influence. They were taken seriously enough to be documented, studied, and archived by institutions tasked with national security and scientific rigor. Whether or not one believes in the literal truth of abduction narratives, the official response demonstrates that something about these experiences compelled methodical observation and careful consideration. As this exploration continues, the focus will shift outward once more, from institutional awareness to the role of society, media, and culture in shaping public perception. The interplay between personal experience and societal framing is crucial to understanding why abduction reports have endured, how they have evolved, and why they continue to resonate across generations. By examining both the personal and the institutional, we gain a more comprehensive perspective on a phenomenon that remains quietly compelling, deeply unsettling, and profoundly mysterious. By the late 20th century, stories of alien abduction had moved from whispered testimonies into the public imagination, shaped as much by media representation as by the original experiences themselves. The transition was subtle at first. Newspaper articles, magazine reports, and local television broadcasts recounted unexplained phenomena with cautious language. Early coverage often leaned toward skepticism or sensationalism, framing abductions as curious oddities rather than credible experiences. Yet even as media presentation sometimes distorted the details, it also provided language and structure for witnesses who had previously struggled to articulate their experiences. For the first time, the personal narratives of abductees entered a broader cultural conversation, linking private memory with collective awareness. Books played a particularly influential role. In the late 1960s and 1970s, researchers and authors began publishing detailed accounts of abductions, often based on years of investigation and interviews. Betty and Barney Hill's story, for example, became widely known after its publication in The Interrupted Journey in 1966. The book meticulously documented their experience, incorporating hypnosis transcripts, drawings, and personal reflections. Its success was not simply a matter of entertainment. It validated a framework for interpreting previously isolated incidents. Suddenly, people who had experienced strange events felt a sense of connection. They were not alone, and their experiences could be described using a recognizable vocabulary. Television further amplified the phenomenon. Documentaries, news segments, and dramatized reenactments brought abduction stories into living rooms across the world. Programs often emphasized the mysterious and the unexplained, sometimes leaning toward fear, other times toward fascination. While critics argue that dramatization risked contaminating witness memory, researchers have noted that many abductees maintained consistent details over decades, even in cases predating widespread media coverage. Media exposure did not create the experiences, but it did shape the narrative framework through which people interpreted them, providing terminology, archetypes, and imagery that could influence later recollections. Movies and fiction also contributed to public perception. Films depicting extraterrestrial visitors, spacecraft, and abduction scenarios often drew inspiration from documented cases, blending fact and imagination. The imagery of beings with large eyes, elongated limbs, and a clinical demeanor, the now familiar gray alien, became deeply embedded in popular culture. While some skeptics argue that such portrayals fabricated or exaggerated elements of real experiences, they also served as a mirror, reflecting societal fascination with the unknown. The interplay between real accounts and fictional representation created a feedback loop. As media depicted abductions, new witnesses sometimes described experiences in language and imagery that mirrored those portrayals. Researchers studying these effects stress that this does not invalidate the experiences themselves, but rather illustrates the dynamic relationship between perception, memory, and culture. The media's influence also had social consequences for abductees. Public ridicule, sensational headlines, and dismissive commentary often discouraged reporting, pushing some experiences into silence. Many witnesses waited years, sometimes decades, before sharing their stories publicly, fearing social ostracization or professional harm. This reluctance, however, did not diminish the persistence of the phenomenon. Even in the face of skepticism, the consistency of reported motifs, missing time, non-human beings, clinical examinations, continued to appear. Researchers have emphasized that while media can shape how experiences are articulated, it does not fully account for the emotional intensity, physical responses, or long-term psychological impact observed in abductees. Memory, both individual and collective, is central to understanding this interplay between media and culture. Psychologists have long studied how memories are reconstructed, influenced by discussion, exposure, and suggestion. In the context of abduction experiences, cultural frameworks provide the vocabulary and structure through which events are interpreted and remembered. Terms like spaceship, gray alien, and abduction allowed witnesses to frame experiences that had previously been ineffable. Yet beneath this shared vocabulary lies the subjective reality of each individual, the fear, awe, and disorientation that accompany moments of profound uncertainty. While media may offer metaphors or imagery, it does not manufacture the core emotional experience that witnesses report. The role of media also intersects with the concept of myth. Myths are not simply false stories. They are narratives that convey meaning, emotion, and shared cultural values. Alien abduction stories, once transformed through books, television, and film, became modern myths, narratives through which society grapples with ideas of otherness, vulnerability, and the limits of human understanding. The modern myth of the abduction serves multiple purposes. It validates personal experience, explores existential questions, and provides a framework for discussing the unknown in terms accessible to ordinary life. Like older myths of fairies, spirits, or divine beings, these stories bridge the gap between observable reality and imagination, allowing a safe space in which to explore phenomena that resist conventional explanation. Internationally, the media played a similar role, though with cultural variations. In Europe, television programs presented UFO and abduction stories with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism, while books by local researchers catalog cases with rigorous detail. In South America, newspaper coverage of missing time, strange lights, and reported abductions often included both personal testimony and folkloric interpretation, highlighting the continuity between traditional beliefs and modern narratives. Across continents, media exposure contributed to a global network of knowledge and imagery, reinforcing recurring motifs while leaving room for individual variation. The media's influence also extends into the scientific and investigative community. Once stories entered the public domain, researchers had access to a broader array of accounts, enabling comparative studies and the identification of patterns. Hypnosis sessions, polygraph tests, and detailed interviews became easier to contextualize when framed against a recognizable backdrop of collective knowledge. Yet investigators maintained caution, emphasizing that while media provided terminology and archetypes, it could not substitute for rigorous, first-hand documentation. The balance between public awareness and methodological rigor became a defining feature of abduction research in the late 20th century. Ultimately, the intersection of media, myth, and memory illustrates the complex ecosystem in which alien abduction reports exist. They are personal, psychological, and physiological experiences, yet they are also social phenomena, shaped by culture, language, and representation. Understanding this interplay allows us to appreciate why these stories endure. They resonate on multiple levels, offering meaning, explanation, and connection while leaving space for mystery. As this exploration moves forward, attention will shift to competing explanations, interdimensional, psychological, and paranormal, providing a framework to consider the phenomenon beyond cultural and media influence. By examining alternative theories, we gain a more nuanced understanding of why these experiences persist, and how personal experience, collective imagination, and cultural context intersect in the ongoing narrative of the fourth kind. Having explored the personal narratives of abduction, the documented patterns, and the cultural frameworks that shape perception, it becomes necessary to consider the wide spectrum of explanations that researchers, theorists, and skeptics have proposed. The phenomenon of alien abduction defies easy categorization, and as a result, multiple frameworks, scientific, psychological, paranormal, and speculative, attempt to account for the same experiences. Each approach offers insight, and each leaves unanswered questions, reflecting both the complexity of human perception and the enduring mystery at the heart of the fourth kind. Psychological explanations are often the first line of inquiry. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, dissociation, and other neurological phenomena provide plausible mechanisms for some aspects of abduction experiences. Sleep paralysis, for instance, occurs when the brain awakens from REM sleep while the body remains immobilized. During these episodes, individuals often report the sensation of pressure on the chest, vivid hallucinations, and the presence of another entity. Researchers argue that this could account for early experiences of being watched or immobilized, particularly when the events occur at night or in states of fatigue. Dissociative states, triggered by trauma or stress, may also influence memory formation, allowing individuals to reconstruct fragmented experiences into coherent narratives later, often under hypnosis or guided recall. Memory and cognitive psychology further complicate the picture. Memories are not static recordings of events. They are reconstructed each time they are recalled. Exposure to cultural narratives, media representations, or even other abductees' accounts can shape and influence memory recall, producing recurring motifs and standardized imagery. Researchers have noted, however, that while these mechanisms can explain certain consistencies, they struggle to account for accounts that predate widespread media exposure or those corroborated by multiple independent witnesses. The human mind may reconstruct experience, but it does not fully explain the intensity of the emotional, physiological, and sometimes physical effects reported. Beyond psychology, some theorists have proposed interdimensional explanations. This perspective suggests that what abductees experience may not originate from another planet, but from dimensions or realities that coexist alongside our own. In this framework, abductees may be interacting with entities that are not extraterrestrial in the conventional sense, but exist in parallel realities or higher planes of existence. These beings might perceive time differently, which could explain missing time or the sensation of being taken from familiar surroundings. Proponents of this theory argue that interdimensional contact could account for the similarities in experiences across cultures and eras, without requiring that the events originate from a single extraterrestrial source. Though speculative, the interdimensional hypothesis addresses anomalies that purely psychological or physical explanations cannot. Paranormal explanations intersect with interdimensional concepts, but often focus on spiritual or mystical interpretations. Some theorists propose that abductees are experiencing interactions with consciousness or intelligence that is fundamentally non-human and non-material. Comparisons are drawn to near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, and other altered states, suggesting a broader spectrum of human perception beyond the physical world. These interpretations do not necessarily assert the literal reality of spacecraft or beings from other planets, but instead view the phenomenon as a genuine interaction with aspects of reality that remain largely inaccessible to conventional understanding. For many, this framework emphasizes the experiential truth of abductions, independent of objective validation. A third set of theories situates abductions within social, technological, or experimental contexts. Some researchers have speculated that certain reports may be influenced by covert military or aerospace testing. Unexplained lights, missing time, and clinical examinations could, in rare cases, be misattributions of classified experimentation. While this does not account for the majority of abduction reports, it underscores the necessity of considering multiple layers of explanation, especially given the historical backdrop of Cold War secrecy and technological experimentation. Government interest, documented in internal memos and investigations, highlights that authorities were aware of anomalous aerial phenomena, even if direct involvement in abductions remains unsubstantiated. One intriguing area of overlap occurs between psychological, interdimensional, and paranormal frameworks: the manipulation of consciousness. Some theorists propose that abductees may be experiencing phenomena that involve both perception and external influence. Telepathic communication, advanced technology, or consciousness-based interactions could account for the structured narratives reported across multiple witnesses. The concept of shared experiences, where independent individuals report similar details, challenges purely individualistic explanations, suggesting that some element of the phenomenon interacts with multiple human minds simultaneously. Researchers remain cautious, acknowledging the speculative nature of such hypotheses, yet they provide a compelling framework for understanding repeated patterns across space and time. Skeptical perspectives also remind us to consider cultural contamination. The evolution of abduction imagery, from folkloric spirits to gray aliens to advanced spacecraft, demonstrates how cultural expectations can shape perception. Witnesses may unconsciously integrate elements from books, movies, or news reports into their recollections, reinforcing a standardized narrative. Yet even within this context, researchers note that many individuals' earliest experiences occurred prior to exposure to popular media, and that details recalled under hypnosis often exceed the scope of widely disseminated imagery. This suggests a complex interplay between innate psychological mechanisms, cultural framing, and possibly external phenomena. The convergence of these theories illustrates the profound ambiguity of the phenomenon. No single framework fully explains every aspect of abduction experiences, and yet each offers valuable insight. Psychological explanations clarify memory and perceptual mechanisms. Interdimensional hypotheses account for anomalies in time and space. Paranormal perspectives honor the subjective reality and spiritual significance of the events. Social and technological theories provide context within broader human activity. Taken together, they highlight the multidimensional nature of the fourth kind, where experience, interpretation, and cultural context intersect in ways that resist simplistic conclusions. Importantly, the coexistence of multiple frameworks mirrors the experiences themselves. Abductees often describe confusion, awe, and a profound sense of mystery, sometimes questioning the reality of what they have endured. Researchers, too, are confronted with a mixture of documentation, testimony, and unexplained anomalies, prompting cautious inquiry rather than definitive statements. The phenomenon remains at the intersection of the known and the unknown, simultaneously challenging human understanding and expanding its boundaries. For the listener, this section serves as a reminder that mystery is not absence of knowledge, but presence of complexity. The stories we have explored cannot be reduced to a single explanation, and the ambiguity is part of what makes them compelling. Whether viewed through the lens of psychology, interdimensional theory, or paranormal interpretation, these experiences remain deeply human, rooted in perception, memory, and consciousness, and profoundly connected to our ongoing curiosity about the unknown. As the narrative continues, we will move from competing explanations into reflection on the modern landscape of abduction reports, examining how contemporary investigations, ongoing testimonies, and cultural persistence sustain the mystery of the fourth kind into the present day. This transition shifts the focus from theoretical frameworks to lived reality, from speculation to observation, preparing us for the final contemplative stages of this journey.